Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast, where we bring you interviews with industry leaders, climate champions, sustainability gurus, EHS, and hazmat professionals making an impact in their businesses today. Each leader solving complex challenges and providing solutions within their areas of expertise. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and thanks for joining us today. Hey, before we jump in, make sure to follow us on your devices and visit my website at seankgrady.com and sign up for our newsletters and email announcements. Now, let's get started. Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Grady. Today's guests are JP Verheul and Mike Allen. JP is the senior chemist with the company, and he leads their national technical sales. And Mike Allen is the vice president of Trace Lab Services. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sean. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for hosting us.
Oh, absolutely. Well, again, for me, I wanted to thank you guys for being a sponsor of the podcast and giving back and supporting all the work we do here on the podcast. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's jump in. You know, a lot of people may not know who Enthalpy Analyticals are, who you guys are. So, let's talk a little bit about what you guys do, where you're located. Give us the listeners a little bit of background.
Sure. So Enthalpy is a network of laboratories across the country, about a dozen labs, mainly environmental services, specializing in analysis of air, water, and soil samples for all kinds of things. So we do a lot of what I call traditional chemistry, right? Metals, inorganics, organics, nutrients, and things like that. But we also have labs that perform really special niche services, things like industrial hygiene and air monitoring, source emissions and stack testing, aquatic toxicology, petroleum work. And then, of course, we've got 2 Department of Defense accredited PFAS laboratories.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. I'm sure those things are hopping right now.
They are definitely busy. The EPA has released their MCLs, and that's pushed a lot of action in the PFAS market. So we're not bored, I'll tell you that.
Absolutely. Mike, a little bit about yourself, if you could.
Sure. Yeah. So first I'll start by saying I love my job. And I think one of the main reasons I love my job is we got a great team. So, in terms of myself personally, I got 30 years plus in analytical mass spectrometry, been in the lab business for quite a while now. Have worked in all sort of different roles, from the bench level to method development to lab management, lab director, client relations. So kind of seen the gamut, had the opportunity to actually start up a lab and from scratch and build it out. So that's been fun. And so right now, my focus is primarily, as I said, I've got a great team working with those teams to help grow our PFAS business. JP mentioned the MCLs have just released, and that's causing us a lot of activity. We're seeing a lot of uptick in interest and need. And so we're trying to make sure our lab has the capacity that is going to be needed to help all the customers are going to need support.
Oh yeah. I got to imagine you guys are really doing what you can to start ramping up a bit. I don't know if I ever told you guys, but I kind of started my career out in the lab.
Nice.
I was in metals prep.
Very good. Very good. I used to run a metals laboratory myself. Did a lot of work on ICP OES. So we got plenty to talk about later, Sean.
Yeah, man. I was like, okay, is there any field work I can do?
I hear you.
Yeah, it got me out of there pretty quick after about 6 months. I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I got to go somewhere else.
Nice.
So, JP, you mentioned you've got two testing labs, 2 labs that are really accredited for PFAS through, what did you say, the federal government?
Yep.
Is that the military or is that right?
So it's great, Sean. So the Department of Defense. So we have 2 laboratories that specialize in high-res mass spectrometry and PFAS. One's located in El Dorado Hills, California, and that actually used to be known as Vista Analytical. They've been doing PFAS work since, I think, 2007, one of the first labs to bring the methods from Europe over to the U.S. and develop them here. And then we've got a lab that we grew organically, I think started in 2018 in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Oh.
So Yeah, both opposite sides of the country, right? And so both of these labs are accredited by the Department of Defense, which is kind of the gold standard in terms of accreditation. But the lab business is a little strange, and you may know this from your time in the metals prep lab, right? That state certifications are pretty important, right? So the Department of Defense accreditation is certainly important for government work, right?
Sure.
But
Yeah.
when you look at work that has to be done at the state level, think things like wastewater discharge compliance, drinking water compliance, site assessment and remediation. A lot of times you have to have state-specific certifications. And so both of those laboratories participate in a number of state accreditation programs as well.
Perfect. Perfect. I bet the Wilmington one's super busy. I mean, that's where like the epicenter for PFAS sampling is probably taking place.
Yeah, we the Wilmington lab has been super busy, and I think part of that is for things that we all know about and read in the news. Gen X is a big deal down there, a big problem down there. So we've been actively helping communities in the area, help with their PFAS solutions, as well as some of the industrial folks that are helping to clean it up too.
Yeah, I've had a few of the Cape Fear watershed, activist groups on the show, and they explained to us, really what's been going on in the Cape Fear watershed and all the Gen X and PFAS that's there. It's just it's a little mind-boggling or blowing, really, when you think about how much PFAS is in some of their public water supplies. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, we were, it's kind of unusual, I guess, for labs to be directly mentioned in news articles, but we were actually mentioned in a news article about a month ago for Pender County. They were doing some PFAS assessment, and they mentioned Enthalpy, and so that was kind of nice. We usually don't get to talk about our customers, but when they put you in the news, we get to say that's awesome.
Yeah, that's really good exposure for you guys, and letting people know you're a resource to be counted upon. Well, we've been touching on the fact that the EPA just finalized their national drinking water rules. What impact has this had on the analytical testing industry right now?
Yeah, I mean, it was. We knew that they were coming, right? So, I mean, we've kind of known a lot of this was heading our way. We had the EPA's roadmap has been out for a while, and so we knew this was on the radar. They had a draft of what they were going to do, so we kind of had an idea of what was going to be needed, and had kind of prepared in terms of getting the methods set up, and we knew what analytes they were going to be interested in most likely. One of the things that we weren't it's not that it's a bad thing, but just didn't expect is that they made additional compounds, MCL compounds. So not new to the idea of being an MCL, but they actually assigned a value. So initially, we didn't expect to have a value for PFHXS, PFNA, or Gen X, but they went ahead and did their homework and assigned some numbers to those for MCL targets. So we're, in terms of what we've been doing, we're working hard to make sure we've got the reporting limits down to a level that is not just MCL level, but you really need to be below that level so that when you report the number, it has a solid reliability in terms of precision and accuracy.
Yeah.
So if you set your reporting limits right at the MCL, that's most likely going to be one of your highest variabilities is right at the lower end of your calibration standard. So we've been working hard to run our MDLs on our newer equipment so that we can actually go quite a bit lower than the actual MCL target. And that way, when our customers come to us and get a number, we can give them a high level of confidence that whatever the number is pretty darn close to what is actually.
That's an interesting point you bring up, Mike. I mean, the method detection limit, it is nice that it's lower than the MCL. And so what is the limit you guys are kind of setting for your methods? I mean, is like, 0 or, where are you at?
Unfortunately, I mean, we do have some very sensitive mass spectrometers, and it's interesting. We, before the MCLs went live, they had their health advisory number that was down in the part per quadrillion, right? It was very, very low. So we had a brand new super sensitive mass spectrometer, and we were like, let's just see, how low can we push this thing? And, in a solution, we could actually see that level, believe it or not. The mass spectrometers they've got now for doing these analyses are they've come so far in terms of their ability to detect ultra low levels.
Wow.
So we could actually see it, but when we actually went and did some lab work, just the background, even though we meticulously screen and test the materials we use, down in the part per quadrillion levels, it's just hard to get a clean enough background, essentially. So we were still seeing, the target was, the single digit part per quadrillion, and we were seeing just backgrounds in the, 50 to 100 type of part per quadrillion for PFOA and PFOS. Those were the ones that we were kind of honing in on. So, that's always a big challenge for us. But at the levels, the MCL levels, back to your question, we want to get down to at least somewhere around the neighborhood of 1 part per trillion is sort of our general target.
Gotcha.
Because that gives us a good amount of leeway for a target of 4 for PFOA and PFOS, and then the 10s, that's even better. We'll be very excited for those.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, there's a bit of some reliability you've got now built in because you get your MDL so low. That's good. Hello, ET Nation. I want to thank you for listening to the podcast. If you're enjoying the interviews that we bring you, please consider supporting the program by visiting my website at seankgrady.com and buy me a cup of coffee. Proceeds will go towards helping me continue to produce timely content and offsetting our production costs. I'd also like to take a moment and recognize a few of our sponsors of the show who have been amazing partners and are ET Nation legends. If you're looking for a drilling and environmental contracting firm to help you delineate the extent of contamination at your site, then look no further than Cascade Environmental. Cascade has over 37 offices across the country and offers a huge range of environmental and geotechnical drilling, site characterization, and remediation services. With their huge fleet of equipment and nationwide coverage, Cascade is a great choice to support your environmental and infrastructure needs. To learn more, check out their website at cascade-env.com. That's cascade-env.com. I'd also like to give a shout out to Enthalpy Analytical. If you're looking for a single source for all your laboratory testing services, then give Enthalpy Analytical a call. With their network of accredited laboratories, experienced project managers and chemists, and industry professionals, they have everything you need to support your next project. They can analyze everything from drinking water, groundwater, soil, sediment, sludge, air, and so much more. To learn more about Enthalpy Analytical, check out their website at enthalpy.com. Finally, I'd like to recognize Zappa Stewart, the leading provider of superabsorbent polymer technology for the power, dredging, oil and gas, and remediation sectors for over 20 years. When a reliable, fast, and cost-effective liquid waste solidification solution is needed, customers count on Zappa Stewart's brand of SAPs and technical expertise. When liquid waste needs to be out of sight and out of mind, give Zappa Stewart a call. To learn more, check out my website at www.seankgrady.com. That's www.seankgrady.com. Now, let's dive back into the interview. Where do, maybe JP, you might answer this one. Where do you guys see like the biggest confusion on analytical testing requirements are and the need and the needs of the regulated community?
Yeah.
What do you think there?
That's a lot. How much time do we have, Sean? So, we deal with a lot of different clients, from the drinking water sector, again, to wastewater, to consultants. And, there's a lot of confusion around methods to begin with, right?
Yeah. Right. Which one should I use for this sample?
Well, and it's a fair question because this is still an emerging market. This is emerging needs. New information is coming out every day. And so a lot of folks know they need to test for PFAS, but not everybody understands what that means, right? When we say we want to test for PFAS, what are we really looking for? Do we have a list of specific target analytes, or to Mike's point earlier, what kind of quantitation limits do we need? These are questions that we really work with folks to suss out. There's a few different methods now, right? I mean, we've got 2 drinking water methods, 537.1 and 533, and then we've got method 1633 that the EPA just finalized, but as of the time of this recording, hasn't yet been promulgated. And the EPA did some great stuff with 1633 when they released the first draft. It was great that we had an official drafted method to deal with non-potable matrices, but they also said, we love your comments and start using this draft right now. And so there have been multiple iterations, multiple drafts of 1633 that have come out since then. And there's been a lot of work that's been done referencing those drafts. And so when you go and look at what are the different methods out there, there's a lot of variety and there's a lot of different applicability. And it all comes back to project scope. And that's really what I tell all of our clients. The method that you need may be dictated by your scope. And sometimes you may not even want to use one of the established EPA methods. A good example here would be folks that want to test for compounds that are not included in maybe the list of 40 compounds in method 1633. At Enthalpy, we can look for, I think about, Mike, you tell me if I get it wrong, but over 75 different compounds that we can quantify. The EPA's list stops at 40. And
Right.
So if you want to do some extra due diligence, then you're really talking about using a new or different method altogether, like a lab's internally developed method. So, we get a lot of confusion around that. And that doesn't even include some of the non-targeted analyses like total oxidizable precursors or things like that. And then, I'll say one of the other points of confusion is surrounding certification. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Most folks are not looking at federal sites. These are mostly not DoD sites. And so there's a question of, well, what state certification is required? Many states aren't even offering certification yet. And so some folks want to get ahead of accreditation or compliance requirements and pull samples now. But there's open questions to their regulators about, well, if I pull these samples now and I use this method now, are you going to accept my data down the road? So a lot of confusion there, a lot of questions, and I have to give props to the EPA. They're doing a lot of good work and trying to get ahead of those. But this is one of those situations where policies are just not keeping up with the need for testing.
Yeah, and there was a time period too before they promulgated the rule that they were defaulting to some of the DoD methods, right?
Yeah, there were folks that would allow for the use of DoD methods. There were some folks that would allow for the use of the lab's internal methods. A lot of labs call their internal methods 537 modified. So there are projects out there where you could use a lab's internally developed method for what at the time was considered compliance reporting.
Yeah.
I think one more, just to add one thing, and that is, and JP did a great job explaining that, but the one thing that we see also is with the accreditations, you're actually accredited right now for like 1633, you're accredited to what version? So if you accredited draft 2, but you have a customer and they say, well, we'd like for you to run, our quality assurance plan says we're running draft 4 or 1633 final, we have to scramble to try to get a new accreditation package into whatever accrediting body that is to be able to help them. So just in terms of confusion, I think that's another finer point that it's not always obvious, but you think, oh, we're accredited for this method, but because it went through so many drafts, and to JP's point, they went ahead and said, let's just start using it. It added a little bit of confusion and a little bit of additional work for the lab side to make sure we're in compliance with the right version.
Yeah. I gotta imagine right now, though, those conversations, JP, that you're having with, say, consultants and project managers and drinking water managers and things like that, they're still trying to figure out what they need to sample for, as you just described. And I think I'd be pretty frustrated if I went ahead and selected some methods and realized that it didn't cover what I was wanting to have it covered. And then it was like, are you kidding me? We just ran, 55 samples and now, we got to rerun them or we got to go collect new samples, and because they didn't understand the method parameters of what they were going to get as a result. That would be really frustrating. So I'm glad to hear you're spending time to educate them and walk them through and making sure, like, validate, like, do you really need this? That's really great to hear.
Yeah, there's so many nuances, right, when it comes to PFAS, and you really can't blame folks for not understanding, the complexities here, maybe what methods they need. And I'll say, we have a really great technical sales team. A big part of our focus is working with clients to understand the project scope. We ask a lot of questions. If nothing, we're over communicators. We'll ask for copies of permits and quality assurance plan and procedure documents, and we'll review that with our clients to make sure that we understand exactly what the regulatory goals details of this data are. And, and honestly, in some cases, we get on the phone with the regulators just to make sure that there's no confusion on our end, because there are some different ways to interpret some of these different methods. I'll give you an example. So there's a requirement with the drinking water methods that a field reagent blank be pulled at every single site. What does site mean? I mean, there's a lot of discussions about, does site mean that it's maybe an entire drinking water system, or does it mean it's every single sampling point within the drinking water system? We've reached out to some regulators and they said, that's a great question. We're waiting for the EPA to clarify that for us, So we really try to go above and beyond and make sure that we understand exactly what are the goals and requirements of testing before we even send out a quote.
No, that's really good. I mean, I love it. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the additional EPA Safe Drinking Water Act requirements. So they recently updated this is like the fifth edition of the UCMR, the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule program, for public waters. What does that mean, and what are the implications for public drinking water utilities, and how is Enthalpy helping?
Yeah, so the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule is a great program. It's in its fifth iteration right now, and really the point of it is to look at constituents that are not currently regulated, but maybe they need to be. And so I think we're right now in the middle of a two-year data collection cycle for UCMR5, which includes a list of PFAS compounds and also lithium, which is interesting. And sort of the idea here is that the EPA will gather this data as it's collected by various public water systems, and then establish hotspots. And so we are actually starting to see the EPA collect and publish data. This doesn't finish until the end of 2025, I believe, at which point the EPA will have a much better idea of who absolutely needs to look at installing remediation systems, and where are the big concerns with some of these contaminants, and what do they do with this data in terms of regulating these contaminants and writing them into future permits.
So this is really EPA's way to assess, the contaminants that are out there that aren't really, they're flying under the radar, and it's a program for them to collect the actual data from an analytical perspective, and then synthesize it, run some analytics, understand really what's going on, instead of, trying to glean this information through other sources. That sounds like a good program.
It's a great program, and the EPA has different levels of support based on the utility size. If you're a very small utility, they may be able to help financially with the sample collection and analytical, or you may be able to share data across other small utilities. So it is a really useful program. I'm excited to see what the final results are, and then what EPA is going to do with that data.
Well, a lot of the challenges I think some of the industry is facing is really knowing how to collect a proper sample for PFAS. Since it's a ubiquitous chemical, it seems like it's everywhere. It can, cross-contamination could happen pretty easily. Talk about some of the challenges you see ahead for those who need to provide defensible analytical drinking water compliance testing results.
Sure. So it is all over the place. Really the best guidance we give folks is it comes down to what you wear and how you prepare to go out into the field, right? And so there are many cosmetics, hair products, deodorants, things like that have PFAS chemicals in them. Certainly waterproof clothing is going to have PFAS in it, food packaging, so you have to be careful about what you're eating before you go out there. And even what tools you use during collection. So, we advise acrylonitrile gloves. You don't want to use latex gloves. The equipment that you want to use will be usually stainless steel, like if you're using a dipper to collect wastewater samples, uncoated stainless steel, right? Or if you're using like an auger or a spoon to dig up soil samples, certainly no Teflon tubing out there.
And then that's like a common one, right? I mean, we always use Teflon tubing.
Exactly. And if you are looking at groundwater wells that may have been in place for years, folks may have been using Teflon bailers in the past, So there are a lot of changes that folks will have to deploy in some of their sampling protocols to really properly address PFAS. And then, of course, you need to look at, do we want field blanks? Are they required? Or even if they're not required, do we want to collect a field blank? What about equipment blanks? And then decontamination procedures, making sure you use a PFAS-free detergent, maybe a phosphate-based detergent or something like that. So certainly a lot different than going out and pulling a regular old sample for, lead or something like that.
Now, are like trip blanks and MS, DS blank, all those, I mean, that's all the same. I mean, equipment blanks, we're still doing the same thing as normal, right?
For the most part, yeah. So trip blanks are not as common. They are more common in some DoD projects, but really, what we're seeing are field blanks and equipment blanks. Folks that really want to be able to show their clients that the hits and samples that they're collecting are real and not introduced in the field by contamination. Right. Equipment blanks are extremely powerful. Especially if you're pulling from multiple locations, you want to be able to show that you are properly decontaminating in between samples. So
right. One interesting kind of a pathway that's come up that I was scratching my head on was vapor intrusion PFAS exposure. And I was like, I didn't realize that it was, kind of a volatile type compound. Is that really a product that's a major concern?
So I'll say that we have definitely seen folks ask questions about it. I think there's concern about the FTOHs and their ability to migrate and go from potential industrial hygiene type exposure concerns. We have not. We do have experience on the vapor intrusion space for other compounds. We have not jumped in yet for the PFAS side. A lot of things right now that are sort of in that emerging contaminant space. Right? We've been focused on what we know for sure our clients are going to need, that they're going to have to do, due to regulatory requirements, and that's really our focus right now. But we do try to keep our eye on what's coming. And so it's definitely on our radar. We've got some really good internal resources that are very familiar with vapor intrusion and very capable of going out and collecting the samples. And I know we got a whole series on vapor intrusion for other environmental contaminants.
Yeah. So it might be worth expanding a little bit on that. There's two components we look at there, Sean, and that's the analytical methods that are available, and then also the regulatory drivers. So, certainly there are volatile PFAS compounds. What we look at are how do you collect and analyze them, and then again, what's the regulatory program that you're looking at? Right now, there are no established air methods for ambient air or vapor intrusion. Now, there are air methods out there, but those are, right now the EPA's other test method 45 and other test method 50, those are designed to evaluate the products of incomplete combustion from an incinerator. They're really more stack testing methods. And so we have had folks, to Mike's point, reach out to us and ask like, hey, can you utilize this method for ambient air testing? But that's not really what they were designed to do. The other question is, what is the regulatory program that will be guiding this? Currently, there really isn't one. Now, that being said, the EPA has finalized risk-based screening levels for certain PFAS compounds. And so, we're seeing the regulatory framework there, but there's nothing official yet. So we're looking at it very closely. Enthalpy has a number of air labs. We operate pretty heavily in the air space. So I think we'll be ready for it once it hits.
Yeah.
What about the waste industry? One of the biggest industries I think that's going to be hit, is hit or going to be hit by this new rule, is the waste industry, especially around leachate. They've been collecting waste for years and years. It's this material is in the materials they're accepting in their landfills. Now it's in their leachate. A lot of landfills are having to actually, pull their water, and they typically maybe have sent it to the PTOW for process and treatment. And now I don't know that they're going to be able to do it that way anymore without doing some treatment. So what's your experience right now, supporting that aspect of the industry?
So we're very actively engaged working with landfills. We work with landfills direct. We also work with consulting teams that are supporting landfills, and exactly that. We're looking at not only we do look at leachates, but we also are looking at their water, surface water, and other types of samples as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, to your point about treatment, we're also working in conjunction with treatment firms that are stepping in to help landfill groups with problems if they do pop up. So we're very engaged with them, and it's definitely an area of concern to your point, and it's an area of need. So we're definitely working hard towards opportunities to help them, not only with what's available right now, but we're also one of the things that we think could be very helpful for folks in that space is a very quick assessment. So right now, if you run a method using 1633, it's fairly costly. It's not an inexpensive method, and it takes anywhere from 10 to 15 business days to get results back to a customer.
Oh, okay.
So that's not a too bad of a issue if it's a landfill just taking a look at their leachate or just kind of doing some monitoring themselves. But when you're in a treatment cycle, going back to the treatment piece of this, where they're coming in and maybe setting up a pilot plant and trying to evaluate what are the best treatment options. In those cases, time is of the essence. So, having the capability to give results back that are meaningful and helpful in terms of the level of detection and being able to turn those results around back to them in a day or two is super helpful, we found. So we've got some, they're laboratory developed methods, but they're based off of EPA method 8327. And so we've done some modifications and are now in the process of getting that validated in our laboratories. But right now, that's something that we're talking to folks about. Some of the states have actually mentioned 8327 by name, allowing it to be used as a substitute for 1633. And so when that's the case, it does allow us to jump in and really get results back to them fast.
So it's more of a kind of a screening method that really kind of give you an accurate number, or is it?
Yeah, it's more than a screen. It's isotope dilution, so it's a definitive quantitation number. It's
Perfect.
just faster because with the biggest, if you think about what takes the most time for 1633, it's a 500 milliliter sample size.
Mm-hmm.
It has to go through a solid phase extraction cartridge. That takes a long time at 5 mils a minute. That's 100 minutes right there.
Yeah.
So, you avoid that step altogether if you're doing it by what is basically a dilute and shoot, a direct inject approach. So you dilute the sample with your internal standards if you're doing it by 8327. So you basically cut out a lot of the prep time, and then you use the power of the newer mass spectrometers with their level of detection being so low to still achieve meaningful numbers down at those low-level single-digit part per trillion.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a lot faster, and we can pass the cost on to our customers too. We don't have to charge them the same rate as what we do for 1633. So it's faster, it's less expensive, and honestly, the data are so far that we've seen, especially
just as good.
Yeah, it's really good data. That was what I was
So maybe you don't use that method for, say, just for like confirmation or closure sampling, but you could use it for other methods, like just kind of doing investigation. I'm wanting to really explore, see what's here.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's good.
For the treatment, I think that's another. You led off with that, and that is a major place that we can add value is for the treatment companies when they're starting out their treatments, exploration essentially. What media is going to work, what technique I need, how long can I run it through before I see breakthrough, how often do I need to change out the material, blah blah. But those are the things that they care about, and getting them those results back quick saves them a lot of money, so they don't have a bunch of people in the field waiting.
Yeah, no, I mean that's great. When we talk about the types of media that you guys can analyze, we've talked about groundwater, we've talked about some, kind of water related type, maybe even vapor a little bit, but what other materials? I mean, we're talking soils as well. Cause I mean, if you're doing a investigation site assessment, you really need to do both soil, groundwater. What other can you do? Blood, epidemiology stuff. Tell me what you guys are able to do.
Yeah, we can do, in addition to the soil and water that you mentioned, we work with biosolids, we work with tissues. We do quite a bit of fish tissues, as just an example. Something that you're interested in. So we've been doing that. Plasma, human serum, we do that. Air, I think JP mentioned briefly, OTM 45. We've got OTM 45 up and running So we can do air analyses. Let's see, products for consumable products that people use, or personal hygiene products that people utilize and use.
Yep.
There's a big thing not too long ago about it being in the toilet paper, right? Or concern. So we looked at toilet paper, we looked at pizza boxes, we looked at popcorn bags.
Oh goodness! Could you imagine? Yeah, the source of my rectal cancer has been the toilet paper.
Yeah.
That'd be horrible.
A good thing, right? Not a good look.
No.
So anyhow, we got a wide variety of different matrices that we can work in and
okay.
Yeah. And it's probably worth mentioning, in that same vein, Sean, that we do a lot of R&D work, right? So, Mike mentioned product testing. We can develop methods for folks that are looking for, either special target analytes or, looking for us to evaluate maybe some matrices for which there is no standard method. I mean, right now, the methods are all for environmental samples, right? So if somebody wants to look at something outside of that, really R&D is going to be required. And we play in that space pretty well.
Oh, that's great.
We see a lot of that, Sean, especially with the PFAS destruction space.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interest right now in what techniques are good for PFAS destruction. And so when they're looking at that, they're looking and trying to think about the chemistry of what's happening and what the process, what's their chemical process for the degradation pathway. And so they're trying to look at what other PFAS compounds may be made. I mean, if you think about it, JP, you're pretty close, between 75 and 80 compounds is what we can run right now for PFAS and measure accurately. And that's because, really we're pretty much limited by the amount of standards that we can get our hands on, right? So reference material is a key. You got to have a good standard. And if you're going to have it as an accredited method, you got to have a second source standard. So basically it's a standard to check your standard, right?
Yeah.
Good analytical chemistry. And there's just not a lot of suppliers out there going out much beyond around 80 different PFAS that are available for analysis. Even with some of the new methods that were recently released for the volatiles, JP, you mentioned earlier, the products of incomplete combustion, OTM50. It's a little bit of a struggle right now for us to find a provider of gas canister that can actually give us the standard. So it's early in on it, right? So not everybody's gotten everything up to speed and fully in production, if you will, production mode. So some of the things that we're limited by are just the fundamentals, like standards.
Yeah.
If we had more standards, we could do more PFAS compounds or different PFAS compounds.
Well, what do you see are going to be some of the biggest industry concerns with PFAS in the coming years?
Yeah. It's a loaded question.
It's a loaded question, but from your perspective,
it's a fair question. It's interesting when we were talking about drinking water earlier. I was thinking about how all the emphasis right now is on drinking water, right? We've got the MCLs for drinking water. Drinking water treatment plants are going to be required to install all of their treatment systems where required within the next 5 years. But really, the biggest impact is going to be everybody else that affects the drinking water, right? And that's a pretty broad set of categories. And so what this really means, and what we're seeing right now is a lot of movement in spaces like wastewater treatment, right? We need to make sure that the wastewater that's being processed at plants that were not designed to manage PFAS are now managing PFAS before discharging into the environment. And upstream of those wastewater plants, the industrial dischargers, and how are they being monitored? What do those NPDES permits look like? And
that's a big one. Right there.
And what is, and not to be rude and talk over you, Shawnee, but the other thing that's interesting with that is what's not included in those NPDES permits, right? I mean, you may have folks that are manufacturing, and using certain chemicals that are in the permits, but there may be oxidizable precursors or other ultra short compounds that, are in the effluent that nobody is really looking at yet. And they may form PFAS, by the time they get to the wastewater plant. So that's one small piece of it. And then you look at things like groundwater contamination, right? I mean, we see this at military sites, airports, all over the place, really, anywhere where there's been a PFAS release. And so that's a whole other market. And one of the things that's kind of interesting is the updates to CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response and Liability Cleanup Act. So there are now two compounds, PFOA and PFOS, that have been added to that. And there's language in that regulatory framework that would allow for closed sites, including Superfund and brownfield sites, to be reopened for evaluation of PFAS, right? And so there may be some appeals there. I mean, we're in this brand new territory,
Yeah.
but it opens up just an entirely new world of regulatory drivers and the need for analytical support and consulting support. I mean, it's different.
Yeah, no, this is like the wild, wild west of the environmental industry in a way. I mean, I don't know. When vapor intrusion came out, it was like, oh my gosh, it's vapor intrusion is all the new thing, and it was a reopener for a lot of projects too, right? If you recall. Now, of course, PCBs was way back a little bit, further back. And I think the challenge what we're going to see too is this every state adopting the MCLs or the cleanup criteria for industrial, closure or residential, criteria. I think there's going to be a time period that it's going to take a while for especially states that are, managing their own programs to adopt these rules. And I think the other area that we did touch on earlier, but I think the waste industry is going to be a big hit too to this, the challenge and the concerns, because they've been taking products and waste for a long time that they're not technically the manufacturer, or they didn't produce it, but that's in their facilities. And now they have some obligation to address it. And then just the whole drinking water industry, I think in the next, let's see, what is it in like 2028, 2029 or something like that, or 2030, they have to have new drinking water treatment systems deployed for all facilities that have impacts that are being tested now, right?
Yeah, they've got 3 years to do an assessment, right? And to see where they're at against the MCL ruling. That's a federal thing. So across the whole nation, they have to look at this. And then they've got 5 years to get it below the target MCL value. So they've got to, if they're above the MCL, they've got to take steps with treatment and remediation to do what they can to get it down below.
So to me, like the sooner the better to start figuring this out, right? In a way. I feel so bad for some of the end users of the water of these utilities that are impacted and that are going to have to pay for the increases in equipment and treatment, and because they're going to be the ones that are going to take the brunt of the cost. Unfortunately, I think.
I suspect there'll be a lot of litigation, right? So I think that they're going to be looking. If you're the drinking water facility, they're probably looking upstream of them. Where did it get into the source water that they're using for their drinking water? And then trying to get them to help out with some of the cost controls. Would be my guess. Of course, I should probably stick in my lane and just talk about the analytical chemistry and not the law.
Well, I think we're kind of
it's a logical step.
Yeah. I think it's safe to say there's going to be a lot of litigation, a lot of sampling that you guys will be on the back end of, because, or maybe the front end of, where there's gonna be a lot of customers coming to you guys. And so you guys are pretty well positioned in the industry to support the movement here, so to speak.
Yeah. You said something earlier, Sean, that kind of set something off for me. So it was when you mentioned the PCBs, right? So the PCB issue that I think it was the mid 90s where, everybody was worried about PCBs and we have 209 congeners and how do we deal with this? I think there is an analogy there to PFAS. And I think the primary difference kind of speaks to your earlier question about what is the impact on this entire industry? What does this mean for the future, right? And the difference that I'm talking about is with PCBs, right? It's kind of the same initial structure, and then you have 209 congeners with different chlorine atoms in different spaces. Well, PFAS, though, is completely different animal. I mean, you've got, like, at this point, I think some people are saying 15,000 different compounds, and you may have one carbon versus 18 carbons, and you can have some fluorinated or all fluorinated in different functional groups, and you may have an ester or you may have a dimeric acid or trimeric acid. And so all that to say, these are very, very, very different compounds, right? They're all one class, but analyzing them and understanding the health and toxicological effects of all of these is a huge undertaking. And so the reason I mention all of that is that I think as we look into the future and try to figure out what this is going to look like, it's all going to depend on this new information that comes out about so many of these chemicals that we don't fully understand.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there. I think we're just on the forefront of this whole new space in the environmental industry, and I mean, it's exciting to some degree because it's new and it's interesting and it's different and it's what everyone's talking about. It's a little disappointing just because we're talking about it, but at the same time, I'm glad there's providers in the industry like Enthalpy Analytical that are helping industry and customers address these needs and these regulatory concerns. And so I really appreciate to have you guys come on. One of the things that's coming up that I'll mention to the listeners is we have the EHS Hazmat Summit coming up, and you guys are going to be there. You're speaking at the conference. You're exhibiting at the conference. Talk a little bit about what you're going to be talking about there at the conference for those listening who may still be interested in attending the conference. And you can go to www.ahmpnet.org to learn more about the conference. But, go ahead and JP, tell us what you guys are going to be doing.
Sure. So we're very excited to participate in the conference, Sean. I mean, we'll have a booth there, so I'll be there from start to finish, and hope that folks will approach us with any questions they have after this podcast or after the presentations. And I'll be speaking on different analytical methods. If I can do a deep dive into some of those methods to help folks understand exactly what we talked about earlier. When do you ask for which method, and what are some of the important things to understand about how they work and how to communicate with the laboratory? And then, to discuss some of the upcoming methods and, how we're here to help the consultants and the rest of the environmental industry. So should be a good presentation. I'm really looking forward to doing it.
No, it's great. I'm glad you guys are coming as well. I'm looking forward to it. And gentlemen, thank you for coming on the show today and talk a little bit about Enthalpy Analytical, what you guys are doing, what you see in the industry with the whole aspect of PFAS and the analytical testing concerns and the challenges all the various partners and players will be facing with this whole new regulation that's been laid out by the EPA. So thanks for coming on, and we really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Sean. This is great.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. We really appreciate you giving us the time to chat.
Thanks for listening and watching the show. If you enjoyed the show, please share with your friends and coworkers on social media. Thanks for being a part of ET Nation. We'll see you next time.